Hi everyone, I'm Shannon McCracken and welcome to this video where we are talking about the classical era. Hopefully you've already watched the first 3 videos because this is really a continuation on what we've already learned and the terms and the styles and genres we've already covered. It's also going to give us a greater understanding of where did we come from and how did we get here. So the classical era, 1750 to about 1825. Historians often refer to the classical era, the 18th century, as the Age of Enlightenment. This era was characterized by the pursuit of knowledge, rational thinking, and a growing desire for equality among all people. Over time, the ornate and opulent style of the Baroque era was replaced by this new idea of thinking, this new ideal where in the classical era, we want proportion, symmetry, and balance. Musicians and artists and architects were inspired by simplicity and clean lines. So this is a lot different compared to the Baroque era. And if you just take a moment to do a little Google search, what was the art that was created? What was the architecture of this era? And you can compare it all the way to the Middle Ages, to the Renaissance, to the Baroque era, and you can really see the changes in society and culture and the way of thinking. Okay, so many exciting and new developments took place in the classical era, elements of musical style in this era. One is that there's the creation of sonata form. Now this is used in instrumental music. So in addition to the sonata, there was the sonata cycle, and that's a multi-movement genre, and it really defined the structure of music genres such as the symphony, the string quartet, the solo sonata, and the concerto. So classical ideals of proportion and symmetry and balance are all fully demonstrated and brought to life in these genres. The second element of musical style in the classical era, the dense polyphony that we heard in the Baroque era, no more. It's now, again, proportion, balance, symmetry, clean lines. It really is simplified. At the end of the era, as we lead into Romanticism, things change, right? We have Beethoven and things get, whoa, very dramatic. So in the classical era, we now have single melody lines supported by harmonies. Balanced 4-measure phrases were defined by clear cadences. And then the harpsichord was gradually replaced by the piano. So I wanted to discuss this term classicism. You very likely already know what this is, but classicism refers to the cultures of ancient Rome and Greece, as well as the art, the architecture, and music of the late 18th century. It adheres to the principles of symmetry, balance, and proportion, and there's an emphasis on excellence, enduring value, and timeless quality. So with the rise of the middle class in the 18th century, the role of music in society continued to change and to evolve. In the spirit of the Enlightenment and the growing desire for social equality, the pursuit of knowledge and interest in art and music spread beyond aristocratic circles, like we've seen previous. The growth of amateur music making, particularly in the areas of solo keyboard, in voice and keyboard, and a variety of chamber ensembles, went hand in hand with these developments. In addition, the popularity of public concerts, it presented new opportunities for anyone who wanted to go to listen to music, who could afford the price of a ticket, to go and do so. Until then, enjoying a concert, enjoying live music was a luxury for people of nobility. So this is a really big shift. Okay, so we're going to talk about oratorio. Now, I know we discussed the oratorio in the previous video, but the oratorio continued to evolve and be a very prominent genre in the classical era. And it's a great example of choral work and ensemble work. So one of the reasons that the oratorio flourished in Italy in the Baroque era was because the Roman Catholic Church, they banned opera performances during the Lenten season before Easter. The oratorio provided audiences with all of the musical drama that opera has, but without the costumes and the scenery. So the Italian word oratorio is derived from the place in which these works were first performed, an oratory or prayer room of a church. Characteristic features of an oratorio. It begins with an orchestral overture. It contains recitatives, arias, ensembles, and choruses. The performing forces included vocal solos, chorus, SATB, orchestra, including the basso continuo, and it's usually based on a sacred theme, often with biblical texts. And again, it's performed in a concert setting, so without the scenery and the costumes and acting through movement. I like to think of an oratorio as an unstaged opera. So our focus today in the oratorio will be on Haydn's The Creation. So this oratorio is originally in German. The source of the libretto is the Book of Genesis and John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost. It was completed in 1798, and there are 3 parts to this oratorio. The performing forces include the soprano, tenor, and bass soloist, SATB choir, orchestra with basso continuo for the recitatives. The structure of the creation, 3 parts. Part 1 tells the first 4 days of the creation. Part 2 tells the last 3 days of the creation. And then part 3 is set in the Garden of Eden. Okay, so we are going to listen to 2 types of recitatives and then a chorus. And I'm really excited to talk about the 2 different types of recitatives that exist. Recitatives are speech-like, declamatory style of singing. They get the message out, they get the dialogue out, they advance the plot. The writing often has the same inflections, both in pitch and rhythmically, that a person speaking would have. Type number 1, we have the recitativo secco, which is Italian for a dry recitative. This recitative is supported only by the continuo, and we're going to see an example of that in just a moment. The second type of recitative is recitativo accompagnato, which is Italian for accompanied recitative. It's still a speech-like declamatory style of singing, but this one's supported by an instrumental ensemble or a full orchestra. This allows for a greater connection between the text and the music. So we're going to jump into number 12, 13, and 14 of the creation. The first recit is unaccompanied. It's supported by the continuo only. The second recit is accompanied, and you'll hear that there's an orchestra beneath it. After that, we're going to listen to a beautiful chorus. So, enjoy.
And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and to give light upon the earth. And let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and for years. He made the stars also. Rising now the sun and darts his rays. An amorous, joyful, happy spouse, a giant proud and glad, to run The space immense of the azure sky, innumerous hosts of radiant orbs adore, and the sons of God announced the fourth day in song divine, proclaiming thus his power.
Okay, so much there. So in the first recit, and God said, "Let there be light," there's sparse accompaniment. That's a great example of that dry recitative. There's a declamatory style of singing, and it's presenting the text with clarity. And this recitative is describing the fourth day of creation, on which God created earth and the heavens, the sun, the moon, and the stars. It brings us right into the next recitative, and this one is andante and in cut time. It begins in D major, whereas the first one begins in C major and is in common time. In this recitative, we have accompaniment, and It begins with this beautiful orchestral introduction, and it vividly depicts the rising of the sun with a slow ascending D major scale accompanied by a broad orchestral crescendo. I just think this introduction is like so epic. There's examples of word painting with softer beams. On the text with softer beams, it's presented in G major, which is the subdominant key of D major. And the cellos and the basses play softly a gentle ascending melody to portray the quiet ascent of the moon. The space immense. Haydn employs dotted chords to punctuate the music, suggesting the countless stars in the night sky. It's really beautiful. Then we go into number 14, the chorus. The heavens are telling the glory of God. If we look at measures 1 to 4, the SATB chorus is using a homorhythmic setting accompanied by orchestra. There's an example of word painting in the short trio that follows. The word night is suggested by a brief shift to C minor from C major. So this chorus is in C major, it's allegro, and it's in cut time. When we go to the word night, we shift for a moment into the minor, C minor. After the trio, the chorus returns to its opening melody, but now the material is treated contrapuntally with the imitation between the voices. Example of word painting, in all the lands. Those lyrics are sung by the trio of soloists, and it's repeated expansively to suggest Earth's broad domain. The final chorus expands once more on the opening melody, alternating homorhythmic and imitative textures. All right, so now we have opera. We also looked at this genre in the previous video. Opera is still a huge genre, and it's another great example of choral music, of ensemble music, of really it requires teamwork of all musicians. So let's look at opera and how it changed in the classical era. So throughout the 18th century, opera was a very popular form of entertainment. So while traditional Italian opera continued to thrive, many other types of opera were developed. By the mid-century, Italian composers were experimenting with an exciting new form of comic opera called opera buffa. So eventually, everyone accepted comic opera to be on the same level as serious opera. So there's different types of opera. Opera buffa. It's Italian for comic opera. It's sung throughout with no spoken dialogue, and it featured down-to-earth characters, fast-paced plots, farce, and sexual innuendos. Then we have opera seria, which is Italian for serious opera. And at first, like, this was the serious and the best type of opera, right? It's also sung throughout, and generally it's based on historical or mythological subjects. So now in the classical era, the comedic opera is now like, ooh, on par with the serious opera. Funny can be just as important too. Then we have Singspiel, and that is a German comic opera, and that does contain spoken dialogue. So today we are going to listen to some Mozart. The Marriage of Figaro, it's an Italian opera, and it's funny. The composition date is 1786, and there are 4 acts. Now remember when I said comic opera has fast-paced plots? This one does. If you go to look at the plot summary of this opera, it is so long. A lot happens. So this opera is among the most popular and most frequently performed operatic masterpieces by any composer. It represents a crowning achievement in Mozart's output. It combines sublime music with a plot that is at the same time entertaining, amusing, and thought-provoking. He elevated and redefined this comedic opera genre. So one of the reasons we're listening to this trio from The Marriage of Figaro, because it's lovely and interesting and funny, but one of the main reasons is because it's a little bit unique, because it's using sonata form. And sonata form was created and evolved in the classical era. So sonata form is a formal structure and is often used in the first movement of a sonata cycle. It consists of an exposition, which has a statement of 2 or more contrasting themes. It has a development section. There's a departure. It's different in the development section. And then there's the recapitulation, which is the return to the themes that were presented in the exposition. And then we finish with a codetta or a coda. So it's kind of like an ABA, but there's a lot more to it. This is a huge development in the classical era and is used in the trio. So we have the first theme in B flat major and it's sung by the Count. Then the bridge is sung by Basilio, and then the second theme that's presented is in the dominant minor and it's sung by Susanna. That's the exposition. Each character expresses their own emotions, creating contrast and a rich musical texture.
Cosa sento? Tosto andate e scacciate il seduttor. Tosto andate, scacciate il seduttor. In appunto son qui giunto. Perdonate, o mio signor.
Che ruina, mi dischino, sono presa dal dolore.
Tosto andate, andate.
Al punto, sì.
E scacciate il seduttor.
Perdonate, o mio signor. Mi dischino, sono presa dal dolore. Sono presa dal dolore.
Aspetta, poverina, oh mio Dio, levate il cor. Come Dio, levate il cor. Come Dio, levate il cor.
Pian piani su questo seggio. Dove sono? Cosa veggio? Che insolenza, no d'amor, oh no d'amor, oh no d'amor.
Siamo per aiutare e sicuro il vostro e si guarda stenzor e si guarda stenzor.
Ah, ben faggio quel che ho detto, era solo un mio sospetto. È un'insedia, una perfedia, non credete all'impostor, non credete all'impostor, all'impostor, all'impostor.
Parla parte Camerino,
Poverino,
parla parte Camerino,
poverino,
poverino, poverino, ma da me sorpreso ancor.
come, che, come, che.
Da tua cugina l'uscio ier trovai rinchiuso, picchio, ma pre-barbarina paurosa fuor dell'uso. Io dal muso insospettito guardo, cerco in ogni sito, ed alzando pian pianino il tappeto al tavolino vedo il paggio. Ma cosa feccio?
Ah, crude stelle,
Ah, meglio ancora signor.
Accader non può di peggio.
Or capisco come va.
Giusti vecchi mai sarà.
Così fan tu bene, e non c'è una vera.
Accader non può di
Vorresti
peggio.
si va, signor.
Giusto mai.
Or capisco come va. Cosa tristissima, signor. Ora c'è quel che ho detto era solo un mio sospetto.
Accader non può
Non
di
è
peggio.
stissima, signor.
Giusti mai.
Or capisco come va. Cosa è tristissima, signor. Ora c'è così fa tu che si intende, così fa tu
So those are some really fun pieces that were created in the classical era. I hope that after watching all of these videos, you have a greater understanding of how music developed in the Western art world. And then maybe you just really enjoyed listening to the pieces. So thank you so much for joining me. I had a blast, and I hope you did too. There's so much to explore. This is like just the icing on the cake. And take care. Thanks.